Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's project, I wanted to share with you a quick art journaling page using some Dilutions acrylic paint and golden acrylic paint, some Dr. P.H. Martin's pen white ink, as well as some stencils to create a really quick but fun little project. So let's get started. To start with, I'm using my Dina Wakley Media Journal, and this is a piece of the canvas paper. I have already added gesso to both sides because I want this to act more like a stretched canvas. As well, I've added a piece of masking tape along the top. I actually have another image here that I've already done. I didn't want to end up with paint on it, so I am actually using this to kind of protect my page. It is basically painter's tape, so it should not stick and should come off fairly easily. So to start with, I'm going to add Dilutions Postbox Red and Pomegranate Seed paint to this background using these Ranger ink blending tools. These pads are actually clean. They just carry a little bit of pigment after being washed. So basically make sure you have a clean one to start with and you can quickly add paint to your project. So I'm going to add the Postbox Red first. You can see a little bit of paint I had in there from the last time I did this. So basically, I'm just throwing a little bit and kind of globbing it on. I don't normally go this thick, but I'm just trying to do like coverage really quickly here. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect coverage. The whole point of this is to be really quick in application. And you can see a little of the canvas coming through, but I'm going to now add the darker color. So you actually probably want to go light to dark with this, just so that you don't end up with such a dark color that all of your light color disappears. I'm going with a little bit of red again, just so it's not quite as deep in color. I like a little bit of the vibrancy of the red to come through. So you want to make sure that this is completely dry before you move on to the next step. The next thing you want to do is to actually add some stencils to this image. So to start with, I'm going to actually use my palette paper here. I'm going to add some manganese blue hue, which I've actually already added a little bit to the page, but I want to add a little bit more. I'm also going to add a little bit of titanium white in. I actually don't have a lot of heavy body titanium white, so I'm just using this high flow acrylic titanium white. It's actually more highly pigmented, and because it is a little bit thinner, it should mix nicely with the paint I already have and create a nice kind of smooth texture to work with. I'm also going to throw a little bit of cerulean blue onto the side here, just so I can add a little bit of variation in my color. And also a little bit of the Dina Wakley Ocean. So I'm going to add again another sponge to my little ink blending tool. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to actually mix this with a palette knife to try to make sure I have a good color and a good mix. With the paints being a little bit of two different consistencies, I want to make sure that I actually have it well mixed, just so I end up with a color that I really like, and it'll go on really smoothly. So I'm just going to put that straight onto my foam and move my palette so we can apply it to the stencil. So I really like this chicken wire look, so I'm just going to fairly gently add it through the stencil. And if you want a little bit crisper image, you probably shouldn't rub the way I was rubbing, or you have to make sure you're very, very careful how much pressure you put on it, just so that you end up with a really clean image. I'm not always super particular about this, so if you are, make sure that you maybe dab a bit more like so, over like rubbing. The rubbing kind of puts it on smoother. This paint glides pretty well, but it might leave a few marks that maybe you don't want. I don't mind them because I like the variation, but not everyone does. I'm going to add a little bit of teal in here. Just brighten it up a little bit. Even though teal is a bit of a cooler color, I kind of like what it does when added on with this particular manganese blue hue. Just a tiny bit down here. And now I'm going to add a few hearts. I generally am fairly random as I'm doing this. Sometimes I like adding patterns together. I think it adds, when you're using it the same color and just putting in two different patterns, I think it adds a little bit of, a little bit more interest. So make sure this is fully dry before you move on to the next step. So this is a Rebecca Bear stencil that I found that I really, really like. And I'm going to just basically add it on top of everything else that I have done so far. And so again, because the stencil is bigger than the space that I have, you can kind of choose which part of the image you really want to show through. So again, I'm going to use my sponge, put it into the paint, and put it on through the stencil. What I really like about the golden artist colors is, especially when it comes to metallics, they have a really interesting property. I've actually played around with the iridescent golden acrylics. They actually have a bit of a color flipping property to them, which means that in one area they will look almost transparent, and then the other, when you move the piece of paper, they will come out almost blue. And so I really like the final product that you get from using some of these more interesting paints. And it's interesting because I find that as an art journalist, you know, you end up running into people that have never stepped foot in an art store. And I believe that if you are going to be painting a lot with acrylic, you really should be visiting your local art store. It might seem intimidating at first, but there's so many good products and there's so much help that you can get from people there about how to use these paints in a way that are really effective. Kensington Art here in Calgary is one of the art stores that I go to because they seem like they are open to helping people at every stage in their art journey. And so for me, it's been kind of a good place to kind of get my feet wet, to try some acrylic painting, to try some different things, and not feel like I have to know it all before I can step in the door. And because of that, I've actually come up with all sorts of interesting products and things to add to my art journal that you would not usually find in a card making store or more of a crafting store. So it's something to think about. Some of this is embracing the fact that we are artists, even if our art isn't necessarily oil painting. I think it's very important that we don't limit ourselves in our creative journey, but if we enjoy doing a particular type of art, just do it. And I'm running in little circular motions. And you can see I have a bunch of paint on this, but I'm not necessarily going crazy with it because you can see that some of the color underneath is still coming through, and that is the point as well. The whole point isn't to cover up everything that you've done, but it is to allow for some of the other colors that you have here to stick out. So again, you can go on as light or as dark as you want. So some of these areas have gone lighter, so you can again see more of the pattern through. Some of the areas I find a little less interesting, I go on a little thicker. Just again, take advantage, add that interest where you can. And some of these smaller areas of the stencil, I'm tapping over blending just to prevent me from having too much color seep underneath the stencil. So there you go. So you can see that by doing that, you end up with some really neat colors underneath, but you also end up with the gold on top. And you may not be able to see it as I move the page, but there you go. So you can see that some areas go lighter and darker depending on the direction of the light. So this is what I love about this paint, because again, it looks semi-transparent and then it looks really, really gold at the same time. So I know, I think the effect's really excellent, and I think it really adds something to your art. So once this is fully dry, we're going to move on to adding some images and other things on top of this. So I have the Southridge Trading Co. Die cut that I got ages and ages and ages ago, probably more than 5 years ago. Again, I used to do a lot of scrapbooking and a lot more kind of maker art, and now that I'm moving more into fine art, I do have a lot of these things laying around, which are awesome for doing art journaling. And so basically, I like this die cut. I think I'm going to do the back in a deeper color, and I'm going to do the clock itself in gold. It's two separate pieces. So now I'm trying to think about how I want to actually lay this out. So I don't like keeping anything perfectly straight. I like adding a little bit of angle to it. I think it draws the eye. And so I think I want to draw the eye across the page a little bit. So I want it to kind of come this way. And I'm going to have my text here as well. So I'm trying to decide if I want to add some extra little embellishments. So I have these little chipboard pieces as well, and I'm trying to decide if I want to put some of them in the corner here to kind of draw the eye down the page. So to actually bring the eye down the page a little bit, I'm actually going to add a little bit more paint to the background. I think I'm going to actually use a darker color and just add a little bit of area in here, so we have a little bit of contrast between the color here and what we're doing here. So to add interest, I'm going to start by using this quinacridone nickel azo gold plus a little bit of white gesso, and kind of see what type of effect I get. I'm looking for something a little bit dark, but I don't necessarily want to go super deep with these colors. So I'm going to start with a little bit of white gesso, just to try to lighten this up a little bit. And I'm overlapping these. Again, they're not supposed to be perfect stencil marks. What I'm looking for is just something that's going to bring the eye down the page. When I think about how I want to do pages for art journaling, I'm often looking at what type of design I'm looking to do. How do I want the eye to travel down the page? Now I'm going to add a little bit of the azo gold. And I actually think I want to make it a little bit darker as well. It's great, but it's melding in a little bit. The nickel azo gold's melting in a little bit with the background. So I'm going to add probably a burnt sienna color next. Actually changed my mind. I'm going to actually use some Mechanis iron oxide. I really love some of these really fun metal-based colors. There you go. Adds a little bit of darker shades in there. And actually these colors are a little bit different. Some of them are semi-transparent, so again, you're going to get a different look depending on what you're trying to accomplish with it. So I like that, but I actually almost want to add a little bit more transparency to it. So I'm just going to use my palette knife. Take a little bit and scrape it across the page. I'm going to actually need a little bit more than that. So I'm thinking if this is going to be somewhere in here, if I want a little bit more interest, maybe having a little bit more stronger lines in here. Adding a little bit of the white as well. This might seem a little strange, but it'll look better once I actually get there. And since that was a little bit more than what I wanted, I'm just going to add back in some more of the nickel azo gold. Again, sometimes I go back and forth depending on the mood I'm in and what I'm doing, because again, it's important to have something that has a little bit of contrast, that has some interesting things going on, but you don't want to take things too far one way or the other sometimes. So and now that I've done that, this gives me a better idea of if I want extra gears in here or not. Yeah, and I think I'm going to. I think that's going to add a little bit of interest to it. So now I'm going to make sure, I'm going to pull the journaling page off so I can start working on these little embellishments. So now I have all these little pieces. Where do I want to go next? I want to add some color to them. So sometimes I like to keep them just regular, the original color of chipboard. But in this case, I actually do want to try to add a little bit of interest to them, just because they're against a fairly busy background. So in this case, I'm just tapping on some of the gold. So that will look nice in there. And since I've gotten a little bit deeper with the background than I thought, I think I'm going to actually use red as the background color for this clock. Which I do like, but I do think it needs a little bit more other colors in it just to give it a little bit better look to it. Now that this is dry, I'm going to add a little bit of some other colors. So I'm going to throw in a little bit of this indigo, because I want at least the gears on here to be a bit darker. I'm going to throw in some of these other blues. But I still want a little bit of that red to seep on through. So let's go back in with a little bit of red. There you go. So by adding in the blue, I started with the red base, and then you add in a little bit of blue, and then you add the red back over top. You can kind of get this really interesting pattern where it's not all one color or the other, so that when you add this to it, it's actually going to stick out really quite nicely. And what I might actually do is take a little bit of the gold and catch the edges a little bit. There you go. You can add those little bits of gold to it that just add a little bit more interest to it. So I'm going to let these dry, and then I am going to move on to these little guys. So adding a little bit of red, and then I'm going to come with a little bit of blue, and then I'm going to kind of go back and forth between them to decide how much of which color I want to be dominant on the particular embellishment. And I've been actually using the indigos of a fluid color, so it's actually highly pigmented. So just brightening this up a little bit. Adds a few of those dark spots in there, but again, a little bit more interesting. Okay, back and forth a little bit until you kind of get the look of these that you want. Now just a touch of gold on the edges. If you find you end up adding too much like that, you can always just rub it in with your finger. Some of them you can go a little bit, some of them you can go a lot. It kind of depends on what you're trying to, what kind of look you want. So the next thing you want to do is actually use your PPA glue, matte glue here, and actually add your embellishments to your page. So the nice thing about this matte glue is it does dry clear, and so it's going to take a little bit. It'll take a little bit of time for it to dry to this, but basically add a generous amount to the back. And you'll need to give it some time to set. And just set in place. So all those spots that you see where the glue has come through, you're not going to see it once this has fully dried. Gonna add a little bit more. So the next thing I want to do is add some text to this. So I am going to use my Dr. P.H. Martin's pen white to add some text to this with my dip pen. So my dip pen has a nib. It has the holder for the nib. I'm using a Hunt 101 nib for this. Basically what I like to do is actually paint the pen white onto the brush, and then I let it drip off a little bit. Pull it across the side for a little bit. And then I'm actually making marks off on another piece of paper just to make sure that it's flowing okay. And what I'm writing is, in time, it's going to be okay. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot with the pandemic. It's so easy to get discouraged. And I know even for myself, it's been pretty good, but I've had a few moments in the last few weeks of realizing that I am starting to find this is a little bit long. The whole process of trying to get through and trying to stay positive, and just even having to consistently social distance. Like, I miss my friends. I miss going to church. I miss being able to go out and see friends for coffee. I miss a lot of these things that are actually really part of my regular everyday time. And so what do we do with that? It's sometimes hard not to sometimes feel like this is going on forever and that it's never going to end. This canvas is not the easiest thing to do to pen on, by the way. So I usually do this type of work on actual journal paper, and so this nib is catching a lot more than I expected it to. But I think it's trying to realize that, yeah, right now it's hard, it's not easy. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and really the future is very unknown. And I find being in a city that's very oil and gas focused, it's even harder. Like, hearing that I have friends that are not sure if they're going to be working next month, that is hard for me to hear. It's hard to kind of be optimistic sometimes. And even though they're talking about maybe lifting some of these things in a little bit, there's still going to be a lot of social distancing and small groups in place for months ahead. And the question is, how are we going to get through it, and how do we find a way to stay hopeful? And so I really wanted to have the idea that in time it's going to be okay. And so that's why I'm writing on this. Because it is going to be okay. We are going to get through this. And one day this will be a distant memory, but for now it feels very all-encompassing. And that's okay too. And if you don't have a dip pen and you're not interested in learning how to use a dip pen, you can always use jelly markers or something else, or a paint pen. Though I usually find paint pens are not all that reliable for me. I don't think this is quite the right thing to use on the surface, but lessons learned, right? Like, we keep trying things and see how they work. And you realize that for canvas, maybe a dip pen is not the way to go. But I have committed, so I am going to continue to work through this. So half the fun of using a dip pen is because you can put more and less pressure on it. When it does move smoothly across the paper, you can actually end up getting some really neat thin and thick areas as you work, and that's what I was trying to do with this. And I might do some outlining or some work on this in other colors just to try to add a little bit more contrast. So you can see my dip pen caught the paper and splattered, but that's okay. So since it's splattered, I think I'm just going to put some cursive little doodles in here. Just because it splatters doesn't mean you have to live with the fact that it's splattered. So this is looking a little bit dark, and so I'm trying to pull this out a little bit more. So I'm going to add some squiggly little cursive marks. So I like the little filigree look to some of this. It's actually kind of a fun thing I really do enjoy doing. I'd actually taken a course in doing sacred arts illumination, and it was interesting because you realize how much old books have filigree in them and how much it's used as a style to embellish writing and everything else, and so I think I've taken it to heart that it's fun, it's really interesting to do, so why not add a little bit into this. So as you can see, I've now added some filigree around this to try to add some more contrast to this page. It was blending in a little bit too much. So now that this is sticking out a little bit more, and I really do kind of like the rustic look to it, I enjoy the color flipping paint in here. So I'm going to try to have these letters pop up a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit of Higgins black ink around this and see if I can try to pull out parts of the letters a little bit more. I'm going to touch up the paint, the white a little bit more. The thing with that particular black color is it's a good color. It just sometimes it takes over a little bit. It seems to bleed differently than the pen white does. So something to think about when you're using different types of ink on your projects is trying to figure out how to balance it out. And I am fairly new to the whole using dip pens. I took a course doing some calligraphy work about a month ago. Actually, sorry, a couple months ago. And I've practiced it a little bit, but there's definitely some nuances to using a lot of these inks. And so this is for me a learning thing where I'm just trying to incorporate it where I can, try to figure out how to make it work for me, and then kind of go from there. Because again, the only way you get better with this stuff is by practicing. Basically, I wanted to do a page that was a reminder to me that, like, in time, it's going to be okay. We are going to find ways to be mindful in these moments and come out the other side better. And I think the key to this is trying to make sure that we try to keep perspective, that we try not to let the isolation and just everything that's going on get to us, but instead we find a way to reach out to others, to love on our children, our spouses, and other people in our lives, just so that we can get through this together. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could please like it, subscribe to my channel, and click the notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos. I also have a website, hopalongstudio.com, where I have other videos to help with your creative inspiration and to create creative habits. I hope that you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.